This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. It's tax season, and we're all a bit tired of numbers. But here's one you need to hear. $16.5 billion. That's how much the IRS flagged for possible identity fraud last year. Now here's a good number. 100 million. That's how many data points LifeLock monitors every second. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it. Guaranteed. Save up to 40% your first year at LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Giving kids a sense of agency and problem-solving skills around observation to hopefully kind of impart some confidence in the sense that I can figure things out if I'm able to look around and I have a little bit of background knowledge and I can use my own thinking skills to solve this problem. That's getting through life.
Welcome to the Parent Footprint Podcast with Dr. Dan. I'm your host, Dr. Dan, and let me tell you about our mission at Parent Footprint and this show. It is to make the world a more loving and compassionate place, one parent and one child at a time. We believe the key to raising happy, healthy, and engaged kids is for parents to seek the same in their own lives, happiness, health, and engagement. Further, we believe that awareness is the foundation of successful parenting, and with increased awareness and intention, we can be purposeful about leaving a healthy footprint on our children. And today, our show is Unplug, Log Off, and Get Outside with our guest, Hans Aschim. Now, let me tell you about Hans. He's a writer and world traveler. His assignments have taken him around the world on a range of adventures, from trekking in the Arctic Circle to surfing in the Maldives. He attended the University of Wisconsin-Madison, graduating with honors in unofficial record time. We'll learn more about that. He spent a semester at the University of Cape Town, engaging in field research before earning a Master's of Science from London School of Economics and Political Science. And since 2012, he's lived in New York City, working for various media organizations and creative agencies. And when he's not writing or traveling the world in pursuit of a story, you can find him at Rockaway Beach or wandering the Catskills. He also has a new book, which we will be talking about, How to Go Anywhere and Not Get Lost, a guide to navigation for young adventurers. He lives in New York with his wife and his dog, Goji. Hans, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dr. Dan. It's great to be here today.
Okay, so you have a story. You have a story about, I know you have a story because that's what you do, but tell us your story about how, I'm just going to say how you became an adventurer, and you take that anywhere you want to take it.
I think it starts with just a good imagination. I grew up on the shores of Lake Superior and Lake Michigan in a pretty remote area. So I spent a lot of time outdoors, and I was lucky to be able to explore pretty freely in the woods and in the water. I grew up sailing. We had a really small sailboat that was relatively safe, I think, for me to take out with my sisters, and spent a lot of time just on the water, kind of getting lost and figuring it out and getting home for dinner. And I think within that, I really cultivated a good sense of curiosity about the world, and it made me want to learn more about, everything I would see. I would want to go deeper and learn about the history of something and how it worked. And through that, my curiosity just kept growing, and luckily it's still there. I feel like that old saying, the more I learn, the less I know. I think that's how it goes.
Yeah.
That's been a pretty common theme in my life.
I love how just you start with curiosity and imagination, right? Like everything starts there, and obviously you had the space and the place and the freedom to do that outdoors when you grew up.
Yeah, totally. And as a kid, you always want what you don't have. And so I had this amazing natural playground that I explored and got super comfortable in and was able to do really amazing things in. But I was always like, man, I wonder what it's like in Tokyo right now. I wonder what is going on in Australia. I was curious about so many other places and other cultures, and I think like not having access to like big cities and the amazing amounts of cultural diversity that come with that made me even more curious about different ways of life and different people. So when I was able to start traveling on my own, luckily at a pretty young age too, I was 17. I That's exactly what I did. I went abroad and tried to learn as much about other places and languages as I could. But I think really that foundation of just having really good access to one part of my curiosity, being the natural world, and having to really seek out a lot of other information about people and cultures and art and music and literature and things like that on my own, was really nice to have that kind of scarcity on one side and that abundance on the other side.
Mm-hmm. When I read about you spending time in the Catskills, and then when I just heard you talk about at a young age or as young as you could get out, I immediately thought of one of my favorite books of all time, My Side of the Mountain, which takes place in the Catskills for a young boy of maybe 12 who just leaves New York to go live off the land in the Catskills, and it talk about imagination and adventure. Just hearing the story and and wanting to be someone who would learn all of those survival skills, those life skills, those navigation skills. So how did you start to learn those skills? Did you realize you were actually learning them, or did they just start to happen by spending so much time outside in nature and exploring?
I think they start to happen a little bit naturally just through your observation of what's going on around you. So noticing that, oh, the sun sets in the same place more or less every day and rises more or less in the same place. And that's something you learn at a pretty young age, I think, especially if you spend a lot of time outdoors. So just observing things like that, and then kind of realizing some of the science behind it, or just how it works. Like, oh yeah, the sun rises in the east because the Earth is rotating, and that's why it comes up the same way every day. And then you're like, oh, cool. You start to learn more about the stars from there, and also how nature can give you clues to kind of find your way home sometimes. It's about observing, and it's funny because that's really the story of human history, when it comes to navigation. Is it was just looking at the same things every day and seeing patterns and making sense of those patterns, and then starting to use them to go further. So I think on the one hand, it is sort of a natural thing that happens. And on the other hand, once it becomes intentional, you just can go so much deeper, and you could advance really quickly, and those skills you can learn a lot really quickly if you have that observational foundation. If you have that kind of natural curiosity about the world, learning then becomes easier.
Did how do your parents come into this story? Like sometimes parents, right, foster these things that you're describing, and other times parents are, to some degree absent, or just allow a lot of freedom, and these things cultivate as a result of that space. So I'm always curious to hear, how you feel or think about your parents in shaping you and this life passion.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, definitely a lot. I think they shaped it a lot. Not necessarily through absence or, over parenting or over encouraging me to go outside. It was more just giving me the base level of appreciating being outdoors and what that could feel like, and then letting me do it. I grew up in a pretty outdoorsy family. We would do a lot of camping and hiking and sailing, and my dad and I would go out windsurfing together from when I was maybe too young to do it. And so I knew that those things were fun, and I knew that, it takes a little work to get outside, and sometimes it's cold and sometimes you're wet and tired, and that's not always fun at first, but it's kind of getting through that into that, I guess we call it type 2 fun, where it's not fun on the surface, but at the when you get home or when you really start thinking about it, you're like, man, I'm really glad I'm like super cold and hungry and tired and home safe, but I'm glad I kind of went through that challenging moment outdoors to be able to see that sunset or to happen to see a particular bird flying or whatever it is. And so I think they really just gave me the understanding that it's worth the work, and those moments are something you don't just happen to you. You have to kind of work for it a little bit, and you have to be there for it to happen. So I really appreciated that, and just the understanding of that every day you have outside. I mean, because I went to school. I didn't have this a homeschool life where I could go off and do whatever I want. I went to school, and I remember times getting up early before school to go down to the little bay we lived on Lake Michigan, and be like, oh, I want to check the weather and check out the sunrise and see what the bay is doing. We would say, and see what the water's doing, and see if this particular bird I was trying to like track had come back to its nest. And I think once I started getting into doing that sort of thing, my parents were kind of like, okay, this kid, we don't need to encourage him anymore. If anything, we need to kind of make sure he keeps his head in the game school-wise.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Well, I love that you mentioned, homeschooling. We have lots of listeners who have chosen homeschool prior to pandemic. And of course, with our, there's a lot more educational opportunities that have come out of our pandemic life. And there's space, there's time, there's less rigid structures. And the other thing is that, you talked about at the begining of our conversation of the sailboat was, I think it was safe. And, I was out with my dad, maybe too young. And, you also, the concept of overparenting or not. And that is what a challenge that parents have these days is, I know I'm older than you, but, when earlier generations, there was less focus on safety and less focus on bad people are out there to get you. And we didn't know where kids were. I grew up in an area that early on there was lots of unbuilt field, like homes were being built. Like we were in an area that had very few homes. So I spent hours on my bike with my friends going to one field after another field, dodging rattlesnakes and looking at construction sites where there was no one on the weekends. It was like amazing. And knowing, having kids, it's like there's just, I don't know. I guess there's a dilemma here for parents of how to give space, knowing that some things are a little unsafe, and then also where to like keep an eye on things. Do you have any thoughts on this in this modern time? As we're going to talk about your adventure book.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting. It's something I was just talking with my older sister about. She has 3 kids, and I'm really close with all of them. And we were kind of talking about this idea of how, as a parent, I think, and speaking as an uncle in this case, you always want to be there to protect your kids and help them make good choices and everything. And you just can't, whether it's, like you said, wandering through a field that's filled with rattlesnakes on your way to a construction site that's filled with a whole host of dangers. But as a kid, you're like, oh, that's really cool. That's like a sweet fort I can go play in. You can't always be there with your kids, and you shouldn't always be there with your kids. So one thing that I think I learned at a young age was how to make good decisions and getting the kind of skills to think through things critically and to solve problems on your own. I think that, digitally with kids, you open up an iPhone or the internet, and kids are faced with a whole host of dangers, and you can't always be having parental controls on devices, and kids are absolute Houdini masters at getting around those sorts of things.
Totally.
I mean,
Totally.
I remember I'm kind of a child with I had 1 foot pre-internet and 1 foot in the internet age growing up. And I remember immediately when our school got internet, it was like, one kid figures out how to hack around the website blockers, and then the floodgates are just open. And that's what kids do. It's scary, but it's also amazing. So I think as a parent, you have to, I think, giving your kids the skills to make good choices and to think through what they're doing, that's the way. And I remember being in those situations in the outdoors, and in some of my like early travels as a teenager, being like, wow, I'm like, this is really freaked out. This could be really bad. What do I do here? How do I get out of this? How do I get home safely? How do I make sure that, I'm not so freaked out I don't want to do anything ever again. But I think it was just that having the kind of wherewithal to stop, take a breath, and think through what was going on.
Yeah.
That's what I found.
Yeah. And I think there's a few concepts in there definitely worth noting. So a lot of time in this day and age, it seems parenting is done to prevent bad things from happening or prevent our kids from making poor decisions that have some serious consequences, physically or beyond. And I totally get that. Totally get that. And what you said, though, is really key, is how the orientation towards helping kids make good decisions and knowing what to do in difficult situations is actually a different orientation than parenting just to prevent bad decisions, because that's usually more restrictive and can be more just giving child less space than here's some space, here's what situations you might come across, and here's some things that it's really important that you think about if you get into some of these situations.
Absolutely. And to tie it back into my book, which is, this kind of practical, historical, scientific guide to navigation, it's really about giving kids a sense of agency and problem-solving skills around observation to hopefully kind of impart some confidence in the sense that I can figure things out if I'm able to look around and I have a little bit of background knowledge and I can use my own thinking skills to solve this problem.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's life. That's not just being outdoors and navigating through the woods or in the water. That's getting through life.
Totally. I love that. I love that. And for everyone, just to like what Hans just described is resilience. Like resilience is the ability to cope and problem solve in difficult circumstances, as opposed to like roll over and fetal. And so I love that this well, I was going to say metaphor, but it's not even a metaphor. It's like it is the process of teaching kids how to feel confident in themselves, in their problem solving abilities, and to know that they have the tools to figure out anything from a mystery to a really difficult and even physical safety type situation.
Absolutely. And the world's confusing and scary and ever more busy and harsh, and there's lots of stimulus coming at us. And I think with this book especially, it's kind of drowning out the noise, and it's look at what's important. So here is a thing to look at. Look at the direction of the sun. Look at the way this tree is growing. Like, it's really just being able to hone in on what's important, observe it, learn from it, help make your decision. That's something that I've, especially through the pandemic, feel like in my own life, I'm like more focused on what's important, what is giving me a signal that I can take information from to help me make a good choice, rather than just having your eyes so wide open to everything going on, and it's so hard to pay attention to anything then.
So in your book, you start with you mentioned a historical view, of explorers and adventurers, and what is from your research and also, of course, from your life experience, like what is in our DNA, right? Because it's like kids come out with the raw DNA, that the raw innate curiosity and drive, and then we all get society, we all get parented, we all get educated, we all get conformed, right? And like it's all of that is like it starts to just be like, for whatever, like kind of bred out of us, or at least dimmed. And so what is this innate drive that we all have to explore?
Yeah, so it starts from resources. We are driven as human animals. We're driven for resources. So we want to find new things, whether that's food, whether that's land, whether that's just purely being curious what's on the other side of a mountain. So as creatures, we are just naturally curious and naturally want to move around the world and find new stuff, basically. And so our DNA, in terms of like what's in our brains, we have really pretty good cognitive mapping skills, which means, if you think of your house, for example, you can close your eyes and you can totally map the layout of your house in like a couple seconds, depending on how big your house is, I guess. But you can map out a place, and then if you go out from your house, you can map out your block. You can map out, a couple blocks around your street, and you can kind of keep going. And I think you realize, well, yeah, I'm pretty good at that. I can imagine a lot of different kind of places and map it out internally. And then, so that's one skill that we have just in our brains as humans. And a lot of other animals have that skill too. And we also have a bit of an internal compass. It's not as good as, some members of the animal kingdom have insanely like sensitive internal compasses in their brains that help them navigate, oceans and oceans. I'm thinking of turtles specifically. Turtles have certain minerals in their brains that help them navigate through the ocean. So we have a really basic version of that, which helps us navigate toward a goal, not so much toward a direction in the magnetic field of the Earth, but more, I want to go here. So let's say it's to the top of this mountain, but I have to go through this low forest and I'm going to get turned around a bunch. But as humans, like we more or less be able to pick a point and find our way back to it. And that's not the same for every person, but that's something that as humans we do have. And it's also a skill that can be learned and developed over time. But yeah, I mean, compared with what we've done with tools in our brains, it's pretty amazing. But what animals can do, just with the way that their brains are made up, is also amazing.
How would you then say for parents to cultivate this natural ability that their kids have?
I think just practice it. Don't be afraid of getting turned around or lost. I mean, you should be afraid of not ever experiencing that, because that's how you get better, and that's how you cultivate that skill. Is going out into a park or somewhere safe. You obviously don't want to find yourself in a life-threatening experience, but going out into a park and saying, "Oh, look at a map," and say, "Oh, let's try to get to this area," and then look up and say, "Okay, I think it's near this cluster of trees or toward this pond or hill or whatever," and then just finding your way there, walking there, maybe getting turned around, thinking, "Oh, actually, I think it's over here." But just trying. I think that's the whole thing with that innate skill we have, is just using it and not always feeling like it needs to be done perfectly, but trying.
I just had a flash of a childhood story there because you talked about Lost. So we were, I have a younger brother, and I think we were in the San Diego Zoo, and then we were entering like the children's part of the zoo or something, which my parents said, wait up for us, right up there, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm just going in because I'm in my assumption, I assumed it was very small. Well, we get in there, and I don't know if I'm 10 and my brother's 7 or something like that, or maybe even a little younger. Before I knew it, it was swarms of people, and I had no idea where we were or where my parents were. And I remember having that first sense of like pre-panic of when you're lost, like you really don't know where you are or how you're going to get out. So what I remembered is, okay, be calm for your brother. Don't let him know we are completely in a bad situation here. And then I just remember how important it was for me to stay calm because I wasn't calm inside. I was completely overwhelmed. And then go, okay, what did my parents say to meet if we get lost, right? Like, what was that plan? And then, went there, looked everywhere for him, waited there. My brothers, hey, wait, like just figured it out. And then, of course, my parents were pretty shooken up by the time they found us. But I remember, obviously, so many years later of a defining moment because you can't, can't really set up that situation, but it did tell me that I can figure it out if I just kind of keep my wits about me and reach out to other adults and navigate. And I hadn't thought about that till you said that, because nowadays, like so much of our life is don't go anywhere, stay here, don't go out of my eyesight. Here, where's the map? We need to know where we're going. And what you're talking about, though, is some planned activities. I know you have activities in the book and projects in the book, but this, I'm saying like a planned activity to develop a skill where you don't have everything laid out.
Yeah, absolutely. And where you don't have everything laid out, and you also maybe don't know the outcome, and it's not really about the outcome. It's about how you get there. It's about the process. And it's about, you mentioned that feeling of that kind of pit in your stomach when you like realize you're lost. You're like, oh man, this is bad. That's something that I think the more you experience it, the more you can get to that feeling of agency faster and without feeling that same sense of dread, maybe that sense of like, oh man, I'm lost. Now what? That never goes away, but you're like, all right, well, here we go. I know where to start at least. I know how to think through this problem, whether it's at the zoo or whether it's in the woods or whether you're in the airport, you get separated. It's like this sense of like, okay, assess, I'm lost. This is bad, but how do I get unlost? How do I find my way back? And get it. I think as a kid, like if you can get comfortable with that feeling and with that kind of process of like going through the like, all right, I'm not going to freak out. That's not going to help. I need to think instead. That's something that I definitely learned pretty young and has helped me throughout my life.
Mm-hmm. So what would you say, like, what are the key, the theme of this show is really like unplugging, getting outside, like getting out there. And I know like, this is really important to you in your life and what you speak and write about. Tell us what for you are the most important aspects of unplugging and getting outside.
It's something it's so second nature to me that I really have to think about. I think it's about a reset. It's about knowing that you need the plugged in world. The plugged in world is our work. It's our life. It's how we connect these days to friends and family. We need that, and that's okay. But recognizing that unplugging is really the best way to succeed in that plugged in world, and that it's kind of this reset and this moment of rejuvenation, and it's really time to connect with not just yourself, but when it's safe, with other people in your community and maybe people you don't know. And even if it's as simple as just like smiling at someone, waving hi to someone on a trail or in the park and that you don't know, and to me, it's about connecting with something bigger than myself and with my view of the world and my work and what I'm doing. Because you realize the plugged-in world is very me, right? It's very, very, very centered on yourself and your network. And so getting outside is really just a reminder that we're part of something bigger. We're part of a community. We're part of a planet. We're part of an ecosystem. And that to me is what getting outside is really all about. And that helps me when I plug back in. It helps me when I am working with someone, and it reminds me that, someone I'm working with on a project or on an article or whatever it is, that, I'm not looking at them face to face, but they're part of a community too. And they're someone's, sister, mother, brother, friend, whatever. And that's a nice reminder. And that's what I get from unplugging.
Yeah. And this makes me think, you talked about how you straddle, with your age, you straddle the, pre-post internet. All a majority of the majority of parents, this is going to keep changing with time, but the majority of parents, grew up without any of it. And most of the kids have never known life without it. And so I think those of us before the internet, like even though we're still bombarded by being plugged in, we actually still have stories of no cell phones. No one knew where you were all day. Being in college, my wife always talk about there's both the joy and the frustration of looking for your friends all night long and not knowing if you're ever going to connect with them. Whereas these days, it's like, kid, you're being tracked like every step on someone else's phone. And so many of us have this feeling and know what it was like to be unplugged, and how important for us to make that happen for our kids who are growing up in a completely digital world.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really about balance. It's about knowing, like you said, how frustrating it can be to not have that tool of technology when you need it. But I mean, you talked about trying to meet up with your friends and how frustrating it was, but sometimes, or maybe it wasn't frustrating, maybe it was kind of like, oh, it's exciting, and like, I don't know what's going to happen tonight because we can only plan so much. So I think for me, it's really about finding a balance between, technology is super convenient, but it's also, if it doesn't work or I don't have it or it fails or whatever, it's going to be fine too. It's just going to be a little different of an experience.
Yeah.
And just kind of having that go with the flow attitude toward it is helpful. And then totally. That makes you a little bit less reliant on it, because it's less of this necessary thing for you to function, and it's more of this kind of cool added bonus thing you have.
Yes. Yeah. Another memory, my brother and I went backpacking in Europe for part of a summer, in probably mid-20s, early to mid-20s. And we became really good friends with this fellow we met from Minnesota. Like, just started traveling together and just really hit it off. And then we had plans to go one direction. He had plans to go another direction. And we said, okay, 2 weeks, let's meet in this country, in this town, at this hotel on this day. And lo and behold, we did. And it was the most amazing, feat. We were beyond ourselves. And nowadays, right, you can't do that. It's more like, okay, what time are you going to be there? Where are you? Are you running behind? Is the train late? Keep me posted. I know, it's just the exhilaration of that sort of navigation and connection was just amazing. And I'm just thinking, how do we help our kids have that kind of exhilaration that you don't get when you're always plugged in?
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, it's so planned, but at the same time, it almost feels spontaneous, right? It's like spontaneous that this worked out, and it's so cool. That's a tough one. I mean, I think it's keeping kids open to the unknown, because that's one thing that technology really attempts to take away, is the unknown. And I think it's just keeping, it might not be the same experience, but it might be a new unknown that they can be introduced to somehow, or at least be receptive to. I think of eating out and dining out, especially in new cities or places I don't know. I never, ever, ever go on Yelp or look at restaurant reviews or anything like that. I always try to like ask someone, whether maybe it's a taxi driver or it's someone at if I skateboard. So if I go into a skate shop, I always ask, someone working there, like, oh, where's your favorite spot to eat? And then I just go there, and I never read reviews. I try not to look at, photos and stuff. And that's one way that, even with technology, I'm kind of like avert my gaze in certain ways to just kind of, keep myself open to new experiences.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're making me think of just the deliberate practice of not planning, which seems to be really important in a very planned out world where you can just click on something to find something and see what people think about something. It's like, how about these family adventures where you're just like, hey, we're going to go camping, but we're not exactly sure where. Or we're going to, like it's just leaving things open. I love that open to possibility and open to the unknown as wonder as opposed to something to be feared.
Totally. And it's looking at those potential snags or hangups or like, oh, this campground's closed for the season, so what do we do now? Instead of looking at that as some catastrophic, annoying problem, it's maybe a cool opportunity to figure out something on the fly. And maybe that's saying, okay, I guess we have to park the car and hike up this trail for 2 miles and then we can camp. And that's cool.
Yes.
Then you got to go hiking and you got to go to stay camp somewhere that you never would have done otherwise. And you wouldn't have found that on the internet, and you can't reserve sites anyway. So that's just an example of how not planning can be way more fun in some ways.
Totally. We have this, there's Goji. Hey, Goji.
There's Goji, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, that's cool. We have this saying, or the kids in the family, we do a fair amount of hiking. It's like, it's just around this corner. It's just over this hill. It's just around this mountain. Like, because we never know when we're actually there. It's like, wait, there's a whole nother mountain? Like, no, yeah, it's just over there. We're almost there. So Hans, tell us about an activity or one that comes to your mind about that represents something in the book that folks can look forward to in terms of getting outside and doing some of these do-it-yourself activities with their kids.
So one that comes to mind that's really powerful and simple, doesn't require any equipment, is finding your north-south position, your north-south latitude, using just the North Star and your hands. So there are lots of ways you can find the North Star. We have several of them laid out in the book. But once you find the North Star, it's as simple as straightening your arm and stacking your fists from the horizon up to the North Star. And each time you stack your fist is 10 degrees of latitude. So if you stack your fist 4 times from the horizon to the North Star, that means you're at 40 degrees north latitude. So that's just one really simple but powerful way of kind of finding your position on the earth using nothing but your bare hands and your brain and the stars.
And that's awesome. And you talk about several others in the book for people to check out, pace count beads and a chip log, star clock, and many others. So I know that a lot of parents out there have these really adventurous, inquisitive kids that are just going to eat this up. And also, we're always trying to expose our kids to new situations and stretch them. And as we were talking about earlier, it's like build that problem solving, build those coping skills, build that resilience and that confidence, and your book talks about many ways to build these skills in kids.
Yeah, there are lots of different skills that we cover, and the biggest one I think is really cultivating a sense of observation. So really knowing how to pay attention to the world and what it's telling you about where you are and what directions you're going and what's going on around you. And that goes for everything from being in the water, being in the forest. We cover a lot of different landscapes and styles of navigation in the book.
Very cool. All right, everyone. We are going to take a pause from the book and dive a little deeper with Hans with our parent footprint moment question. Are you ready, Hans?
Yes.
Okay, here we go. Tell us about a time that you became aware of yourself as an individual or in a parenting role, and that new awareness had a positive impact on yourself, others, and those you care about.
I love this question so much. Let me just start by saying that I feel like this is something that we think about a lot, but maybe don't always name or call out in our own life experiences. So this is a fun question to ponder. Um, my moment that I'm thinking of, I think there are many moments we have like this in life, but the one that I'm thinking of that maybe dates back deepest into my childhood and something I actually think about kind of often, happened when I was at summer camp. I was probably about 9 or 10. And I remember, I'm the youngest of three. So I have two older sisters who have always kind of looked out for me and taken care of me and, made sure I'm doing okay, which I'm really grateful for. And I remember being at camp and I was kind of just cruising through camp, having a good time. And there was another camper in my bunk, a kid who I hadn't really connected with, and he obviously wasn't having a good time. And I just remember kind of seeing that and not really doing anything about it at first, and just kind of cruising through camp and having a great time. And we did an overnight trip where we canoed to a little island in a lake and camped on the island. And I remember getting out there, and my counselor was this guy, this hilarious guy. It's like something out of a movie. He was like 6'4" Dutch guy named Jan, and I remember looked at me after we pulled up the canoe to the island, and he said, "Have a good time." And then he kind of just went off and did his own thing. And I remember he kind of glanced at this other camper who wasn't having a good time. And I started to connect the dots. And I started to sort of realize that it wasn't enough for me to just be having a good time, doing my own thing, enjoying it. I'd also needed to lift up those around me who maybe were struggling in ways I didn't totally get or need to get in order to help them. And I remember going over to this other camper, and it wasn't like we had some heart to heart one on one. I mean, we were 10 years old, but I just remember asking him, like, "Hey, do you want to go catch some fish with me?" And he was like, "Yeah, sure." And we did. And he started to have a better time. And I just remember that it has always stayed with me that it's not enough to just take care of yourself and to be comfortable yourself. You really do need to look at those around you and see how you can help those who maybe aren't willing to ask for help, or maybe aren't willing to connect on a super deep level. But it's always about just putting out your hand and offering yourself and offering a sense of friendship to someone. That's always stayed with me. And I think it's something that I've tried to do throughout my life. And I've been on the receiving end of that too. I've been in times when I'm not, having a great time and people, put their hand out to me too. So
That's really cool, Hans. That's just a really cool, like, it's like the awakening of like empathy and compassion, and that I don't know, like almost a moral obligation, or just to reach out and lift someone else up, even though you're fine.
Yeah, and I think that even if we feel fine and think we're fine, and recognizing that someone around us isn't, you're no longer fine. You need to help in some way.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's something that I've reflected on a lot throughout my life.
Thank you for that story. That is a great story, and one that we all will take with us today as we look around our day and assess our own life and those around us. Hans, tell everyone how to get your book, How to Go Anywhere and Not Get Lost, a guide to navigation for young adventurers.
Thank you. Yeah, luckily the book is not hard to find. The book's available on bookshop.org. Any major book retailer will have this book, thankfully, and it's very easy to find. I'm also very easy to find online. My name, hansaschim.com, where you'll get the latest updates on events and new book projects and this book. Also, social media, you can find me at my name as well. So I'm an easy guy to find.
Easy guy to find in the digital way, not easy to find when you're out exploring.
That is true. That is true.
Yes. That's the balance, right? That's what we're talking about there, to be accessible and inaccessible and out there at the same time.
Yes, that's the balance.
All right. Hans, thanks so much for sharing your experience with us. And I tell you, for me, and I know for the listeners, sparking our curiosity and imagination and getting us back in touch with what that feels like. So not only can we recapture that for those of us who need to for ourselves, but also cultivate this in our kids.
Thank you, Dr. Dan. And it's a great time to get outside.
It is, everyone. Get outside. You know what I'm going to tell you, and that is just to strive to be the person you want your child to become. Remember, they are always watching, they're always listening, and they look up to us. So be that person. Know that you are not being selfish by focusing on yourself and showing your child how to engage in life with purpose and intention. Tell everyone about this show. Help us with our mission to make the world a more loving and compassionate place, one parent and one child at a time. And as always, I'll leave you with the guiding question: what footprint do you want to leave?